Welcome back to Next Gen Investing. It's time for Under 30. Today we discuss SoundHound AI, and joining us as always, George Tillis, Senior Markets Correspondent for the Schwab Network. George, I'm certain that this has got to be an overlooked stock at some point, but it was one of the names that just threw AI on the end of its name, kind of brought it into the limelight a little bit. And then NVIDIA, in large part, kind of plucked it from obscurity, announced a big investment. And now they've rug pulled that. How does that impact the story for a name that went from, sub $1 back in 2023 to nearly 25 a share at the end of last year?
Well, I mean, obviously the story for the stock price is down because of the disposition of shares that NVIDIA had in terms of the stake in SoundHound. Now, if you look at the context of the news, they did declare they own 1.7 million shares, and it was valued at $8 million. That was based on their 13F filing from September. So if you look at the market capitalization of SoundHound, based on yesterday's close, it was around $5.5 billion. Obviously, that's down about 30%, give or take a percent or two based on the price action today. So in essence, NVIDIA is basically taking profits on their investments in this particular name. And in fact, if you look at some of the other factors of NVIDIA's investment, it goes all the way back to 2017. And so this is essentially a disposition of assets. But if you look at the amount of disposition, it wasn't all that much. But what we're seeing is a reaction to SoundHound because NVIDIA is a big name. And when you have a big name investor, a big name product, a big name stock, basically tied into your business, which SoundHound is tied into NVIDIA because it's a voice-activated artificial intelligence and AI voice recognition technology, they're going to come at you and sell you. And that's what's happening today. Now, if you look at, rationale, first you could make the case that perhaps the move from, sub $1 to, $20+ was quite egregious considering the growth and profits and sales of SoundHound. Now, the company is growing. If you look at last year, the company generated around $67 million. But if you look at the losses the company generated last year, it was basically double those sales, or nearly. It was around $111 million in losses. So, typically speaking, when we talk about companies that are losing money, they generally, when you see strong trends, will get better over time as long as the losses, at the very least, are smaller than top-line sales. That wasn't the case for SoundHound last year. So the price action really became divorced from financial fundamentals. Now, going forward also, and actually talk about valuation just quickly, considering now the sales estimates based upon next year, the stock is trading around 85 times next year's sales. That's quite lofty. But, if you look at also the profitability profile of SoundHound, they're not expecting to earn any money from a profit standpoint in 2025. And so going into, what would be deemed to be a positive catalyst, which is NVIDIA's ownership stake in SoundHound, now flips. Now the financial fundamentals, or if you will, the fundamentals of the company are starting to manifest into reality, and that's why we're seeing the stock to the downside. It doesn't mean it's over for SoundHound. It just basically means that valuation is now becoming more in line with reality, and that's essentially what we're seeing today.
So, George, I was reading about the overall value of NVIDIA's holdings, which dropped to around $304 million from like $433 million just in the previous quarter. So could this possibly be also a negative reflection of NVIDIA? They're shrinking some of their holdings right now. They're divesting in some of these companies. I know they reinvest in other places, but the overall value is decreasing. So could this also be, maybe a sign of perhaps some warning from NVIDIA?
Yeah. Well, it's a good point to bring up. I think, looking at NVIDIA, it's nearly filled the gap since the DeepSeek news. It's around $141. Again, nearly. It's not there yet. But, unless NVIDIA, blows out of the park on earnings and reaffirms or even increases guidance, maybe we've seen at the very least a near-term top in NVIDIA. And maybe now these are other clues. The asset disposition of NVIDIA and other investments like SoundHound is them raising cash and maybe, not being as convicted in the AI ecosystems for broader companies like SoundHound going forward. So it may be telling in terms of NVIDIA's conviction on the ecosystems around artificial intelligence. I can't say. But nonetheless, I do think that SoundHound, at least from a value standpoint, far exceeded the price movement. And we're just basically seeing a rebalance or realignment in the names. And then, by the way, even as SoundHound continued to move higher, short sellers became very aggressive with the short float as a percent of total float, around 30% of shares. So I think the shorts are being vindicated at the very least today in this name.
Yeah, the risk of some of these names. So we've talked about this exact issue is sort of coming to now real life. Appreciate it, George Tillis, as always, for joining us.